It gives me great pleasure to introduce two fantastic artists to you for this first artist-to-artist conversation. It goes without saying that Annea Lockwood's work has been groundbreaking for decades and personally has been inspiring me since I was a student. More recently, I met Tanya Auclair when she introduced her brilliant work about bees at a talk last year. And so I'm very much looking forward to the conversation Annea and Tanya will have. But first, let me give you a little bit of biographical information. Annea Lockwood's work ranges from sound art and environmental sound installations to concert music. Some recent works include Becoming Air, co-composed with Nate Woolley, and Wild Energy with Bob Bilecki, which is a site-specific installation focused on geophysical, atmospheric, and mammalian infra and ultrasound sources. It is permanently installed at the Carrymore Center for Music and the Arts in Katona, New York. Another recent work is Into the Vanishing Point, co-composed with the ensemble Yarn Wire, which is a meditation on the large-scale disappearance of insect populations. Water has been a recurring focus of Anya's work, and her three installation sound maps of rivers, the Hudson River, the Danube, and the Housatonic River, have been widely presented. The UK premiere of her piano piece, Ear-Walking Woman, will be performed during a live stream by pianist Sarah Cahill later this evening. Tanya Auclair is a British Rwandan music and sound artist. Her work explores rhythm, voice, and electronica, treating everyday life like new mythologies and taking an embodied approach to exploring ideas with sound. Her versatility has led to a wide range of projects and collaborations, including a live reworking and scoring of Afro-Brazilian classic Black Orpheus with Charlie Dark, a multi-sensory concert for blindfolded audience called The Sensory Score, and a choral sound piece about bees called The Swarm. More recently, Tanya has been working with pioneering Rwandan drum ensemble Ingoma Shah. She's also a member of Deep Throat Choir and vocal ensembles The Quorum and Blood Moon Project. And her work, Munganyinka is a Transformer, is available to listen to throughout the festival as part of the Zeitgeist Commissions for the Riot Ensemble.
Ooh.
And then there were just two. How are you doing, Annea?
Mm-hmm.
How are you doing?
I'm doing fine, actually. Thanks very much.
Good.
I'm working on a piece so that a solitary existence feels just right. I just keep concentrating on it, make myself a meal, go back and do some more work. You know how that is. It sort of similar for you when you're working on something you really feel super comfortable if you can sort of clear out appointments, clear out run around work and just focus, have your mind on that piece all the time.
Absolutely. That it kind of feels a bit of a luxury because I have a part-time job and various different projects. So often that window is quite small, but when I can, yeah, carving out that time is really, yeah, get so much more done, and I can really like dig into whatever I'm working on with everything, you know.
Yeah, exactly.
And do you like, this is I don't know if this is the right question, actually.
There isn't a right question, just
you said you're really enjoying that solitude, right? Are you really enjoying having that space?
I love not really having to take my mind off what I'm working on, and I love it that I can just sit and be reading something or eating a meal, and somewhere my brain is continuing to run along the lines of what's happening, what should happen next, what should I do with this sound, and so on and so forth, and uninterrupted by meal or reading. It's just sort of a substream that just continues, and the solitary existence is what makes that possible. It's very funny. I at least it makes me laugh. I was saying to myself about 2-3 weeks ago, I really need a residency. And then I sort of sat back and realized I'm living on my own now. And I can make any meal I want when I want. This is a residency. Just clear a space and take it that way. And it's been great.
Oh, that's brilliant. Have you like made a special residency space within your home, or is it just something that you've been able to integrate into your working space anyway? And
I'm just using my studio and the spaces in my home the way I usually would. But I went to my calendar and I just X'd out 8 days. a visual reminder too. So
yes. Oh, it's so satisfying. I really love having the visual thing of it being like blocked off specifically for that.
Yeah.
Back to what you were saying about your brain and the way that it, when you're working in solitude like that, how eating or reading can kind of pass on one level, but at the same time your brain is still operating and problem solving and exploring and stuff. And that made me think of a little bit like the kind of processes that some research into sleep and dreaming has thrown up about how we pass from one kind of brain activity into another, where our brain is operating at slightly different wavelengths or something. I don't know the specifics, but when you said that, it made me think of that. It made me think of how it definitely feels like the longer that you're able to sit within that kind of creative space, there's layers to it, isn't there?
Oh yeah, the longer I can keep my mind in that place somewhere, you know, the more connections, associations, sonic associations suggest themselves, just more and more and more, fortunately, at least so far. And so it's a sort of a layering process that evolves.
Yeah, I also noticed how that prolonged solitude or space also it allows enough space for random stuff to come through, right? Like weird random associations that don't seem to make much sense at the time, but do in the end. Or it might be a little thread that you pick up and try out, and it can lead you into all sorts of like lovely happenstance and experiment.
Yes, exactly right. And I really trust those random ideas, don't you?
Well, I was going to ask you about that actually, because I think I do. The piece that I've written for this year's HCMF is specifically about instinct, and instinct kind of being a muscle in a way, and also been reflecting a lot about trusting your instinct and trusting a kind of an inner voice within the like making process, which isn't, I sometimes find quite challenging. I think I trust when something turns me on and I'm feeling it, and you feel alive and you feel all charged up. But there's, maybe it's towards maybe 2/3 the way through, or maybe towards the end of a piece of work, I often start to, questions come up for me, I think. Sometimes helpful, sometimes not so helpful. So yeah, it's lovely hearing you, that kind of, that inner voice being something that you trust.
Yeah. And doubts surface along with those.
Really? Do you still get that even?
Too.
Really?
Not doubts about the idea that came, but more doubts about whether this work is going to work out, whether it's going to actually end up as a good piece or not. Something that basic, Just these doubts come up, so I go and make another cup of coffee and say, no.
Your strategy, coffee.
Yeah, or something along those lines, yes, and just so to shove them out of the way. My partner, Ruth Anderson, the composer, who died a while ago, my partner was always fantastic with those doubts. She would clear them out of the way with such total sort of energy. It was always wonderful to run them by her. So I conjure up her voice in my mind, and she tells me just sweep them out of the way. Just get on with it.
That's like a wise woman.
Yeah.
And I guess that's the point at which solitude doesn't, or I don't know, those are the points where solitude isn't always as helpful. Like I need to reconnect with people.
Yeah. And such a wonderful energy comes from others when you reconnect. It's such an essential energy, isn't it? Which you must experience a lot, because you seem to me to work so collaboratively.
Yeah, it's been a real the last couple of years, increasingly more and more, actually. Yeah. And I love it so much. And every single collaboration I've learned so much and been challenged and in lots of different directions and tried new stuff out. And it's been a real incentive to kind of challenge my own assumptions about what I can and can't do, what I can and can't write for, and to taking different perspectives on the ways that I approach sound. So yeah, and I've also been extremely fortunate in collaborating with brilliant people coming from all sorts of different backgrounds and disciplines. And yeah, collaboration has become more and more key in my practice. I love the element of surprise, because you just don't know what's going to come out. Even when you think you've got it all set out and planned out, I think there's always something fresh that comes out of that.
I think it's perhaps impossible to plan it all out, which is wonderful, because yes, so those surprises arise. I love collaborating too, and I love all the things you were saying about it, the way it opens up my mindset to possibilities that I hadn't even considered, or possibilities I'd set aside, but now am pulled back to. Yeah, and just exploring with somebody else's psyche, in a sense, partnering the exploration and the things. I mean, my work is increasingly collaborative too. It has been on and off for a long time, but lately I've really been digging into collaboration and absolutely love the process. And so Nate and myself working on Becoming Air has been an ongoing opening up for us both. We recently had a conversation about it in order to write a piece for Arcana, John Zorn's publication. So that conversation got us digging in deeper to what we knew already from the experience, but hadn't articulated, about how it's been to collaborate together and how it continues to be, and is pure joy. And one of the things which became clear to me through that conversation, and I wonder if this is something we have in common too, because it seems like we have a lot in common. One of the things that became clear to me was that an open-ended collaboration allows us to approach one another's being, and allows the work to have an audience able to approach the being of the person playing in a very intimate way. And one of the things which brings about that, it's vulnerability. We started talking about the importance of vulnerability. Yes. And one of the tools, or I guess you could say it's a tool. It's a love of something. One of the things which helps bring us to both to that point of position of total openness and vulnerability is letting go control of the sound. Just seeing what happens if Nate takes that sound, pushes it harder, works his body harder, and then lets it happen and lets the sound go where it will, which is often a complete surprise and really marvelous discovery.
Wow, that sounds so exciting.
Fun.
It sounds also like you're able to take the risks that can then take you through to another place with what you're making.
Accepting vulnerability is also accepting risk, right?
Yeah.
Do you have that sense of embracing vulnerability as you're working with people?
Yeah, absolutely. There was this really, for some reason, it's just sprung up into my mind when a memory of during the rehearsals for this a choral sound piece that I worked on, The Swarm, with Heloise Tunstall-Behrens. And it's for 9 voices. And I did all of the sound design and composition for everything that wasn't sung. So there was a kind of soundscape that ran through most of the piece. And sometimes that soundscape became enmeshed into the music and became the rhythm that underscores the singing. And sometimes it was there to describe something thematically or to try to reinterpret the sound world experienced by a bee, because the whole thing is about a honeybee swarm. And there's one point during rehearsals where we were all, we've been practicing loads and loads, because it's quite intense, it's like quite challenging music to sing, very mathematical. And there was a point where we were in a circle, all 9 of us, and we all looked at each other in the eyes. At one point, there was an exercise that we'd done with a really great artist who came in to facilitate some extra exercises for us to connect as a group. And there was a point where we all looked at each other and took it in turns to all really look at each other and be seen and see each other. And it was so emotional for all of us. And, you know, like we know each other, we've all known each other for a couple of years, but not on that level of like deep vulnerability. And it just like, it shook me up in the most beautiful way. I didn't expect that at all. Just by virtue of having sung together, this vulnerability had not crept in, but it had grown over time. That we turned up every week and we sang with each other, and we were just in that sense, we were just really present with each other and listening to each other, which encouraged an atmosphere of trust. And then from that, we could take risks and be vulnerable with each other. So that's like a little memory that pops up. But yeah, I think in terms of it feels very much like a relationship, every collaboration in that respect too. That there's a certain degree of trust and understanding and good communication, all the things that make a good relationship of any kind, I guess.
That's something that Nate and I both recognize from working together from fairly early on in late 2017, starting work on the piece together. Gradually working together has become a personal friendship, has grown a personal friendship, a strong friendship between us, which is a lovely feeling.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I have that also with Bob Bilecki, who's this magnificent sound designer and inventor, and I mean, he's widely known. He's amazing musician and designer. So Bob and I have known each other for many, many years, for decades, and that's a long friendship. So when we started working on Wild Energy together, it was so easy to just to spark ideas in one another and dig in deeply very, very quickly.
I guess there's no way you could dig in that way if you didn't have that intimacy with someone, because some stuff that you pull out, you're like, I don't even know if this makes sense to me. So I don't know if it's gonna... It's just like, it's so glorious when you can just do that with someone and be like, blah. And they accept you for all of your blah.
Yeah. I've been listening to The Swarm. I've listened to many pieces from your website and find them all astonishing and revealing and beautiful, but particularly keep coming back to The Swarm, which is just, it's large, it's huge, and encircles one somehow. It creates an environment in which I'm just, my ears are carrying me into this beautiful big environment with The Swarm. And so it was particularly moving to discover that you keep bees, you and Heloise, right? You both do.
Yeah. It very much sprang out of our practice as beekeepers and an increasing fascination with their sound world. Both of us being musicians, and at that time I was becoming more and more intrigued by sounds around me and listening in a different way and recording and wanting to make things in that way. And yeah, so it entirely came out of us just being completely obsessed with with bees. As any beekeeper you speak to, very quickly there's a sense that you become a bit kind of obsessed with them. But yeah, The Swarm was in terms of kind of, it was really exciting for both of us to not just to delve in and learn more about them as part of our practice as beekeepers, but also to delve in. And I think one of the things that I was really excited about with making that was finding ways that we could create translations or interpretations of what we observed within the bee world and translate that for the human realm.
Can you give me an example?
Yeah, I guess. Okay. So a nice example is, so it was within the practice as a beekeeper. Maybe this makes more sense. Sorry, my brain has just gone off into so many different directions. One thing as a beekeeper, and you'll definitely get this because I feel like so much of what like I was saying earlier, I've been like creeping on you for for a good while now, listening to your work and just getting completely immersed in it. And I think you'll definitely get this is, as a beekeeper, part of our practice, or part of my practice, has been to observe and listen in a way that I don't think I do normally in my day-to-day, apart from when I'm working with sound and music. And there's a level of attentiveness, of presence that you have to have in order to work in cooperation and support bees correctly. Without that, you're working in conflict because you've got no way of understanding what they need or what's really happening within a hive. So you're using all of the knowledge you've accrued and all the studies of things that you know about the ways that bees operate, but you also have to be really listening to what they're showing you in the ways that they're behaving, the sounds that they're making, the directions they're flying in, there's all sorts of information that they can give you that you can only feel and see and appreciate and understand if you're super present at the time. And that kind of discipline is what enabled us to then work out how we could translate some of that stuff into the human realm. So taking things like, so when a honeybee colony swarms, do you know what happens? Are you familiar with what happens when bees swarm?
No, I'm not.
Okay, so basically it's the process by which a colony can reproduce, they can duplicate. So the queen well, actually the workers decide that they want to produce a new queen. The existing mother queen then once the new queen is born, she gives up her hive to her daughter, and she takes half of the colony with her. They leave and they find a new place to set up home. And so thereby you've got two colonies and they've duplicated. When the old queen leaves with part of the colony, they form a cluster at one point on their journey. So they feed up before they leave, so they know that they've got enough energy to stand them, to get them to the next destination. And then they stop off somewhere and they cluster around a lamppost, or maybe underneath a park bench or a picnic table, which our bees did at one point. It can be in all sorts of different places, in a bush, in a tree. They'll cluster there, and they have a very specific way of moving to conserve energy, to conserve heat. So they do a kind of, the outer bees go into the middle, and then the middle bees go into the outside, and they vibrate their wings to maintain a consistent temperature. And they're protecting the queen, who's kind of in the middle of that cluster. And so the way that we translated that was through sequences of notes that were then layered over each other in sequence, so that so you get this visceral feeling of that sensation of rotation.
It's a very dense energy. I love that texture. Yes, it's beautifully constructed, and this wonderful, dense, live, hot energy in it.
Oh, good. That's exactly what we were hoping for. And yeah, stuff like the ways that they would equally space, we translated that through the use of Euclidean rhythms. And with the sound design side of it, I wanted to give a sense of the connection that bees have to the position of the sun, and the way that the sun's energy is connected to their everyday through the sun's power with plants, and the fact that the bees are then collecting pollen from nectar and pollen from those plants. So there's this kind of intrinsic loop between plant, sun, and energy and bee. And so the whole of the introduction, we took very kindly, was given permission to use loads of solar emission radio signals from astronomers.
Oh, great. Aren't they amazing?
So buff, the crackle and the heat in them, and the textures, and making something that is normally visible as well felt very exciting thing to be able to translate. So taking stuff like that, and that forms the basis of the soundscape at the very beginning. So you get all of these, I layered up and edited lots of different recordings that I found, and then into that, it segues into the sound from within a beehive. So we put some condenser mics inside a beehive and recorded the sounds of the bees, and collected several recordings like that. So that segues into that. And then there's the piping call of the new queen, which she goes weep, 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 when she's born. So that's the kind of signal to the hive that there's a new queen. And then it merges into the greater colony and the buzz of that, and then it segues into the first piece. So it's things like that, finding ways of making visible, maybe not normally visible behaviors.
Yeah.
There's all sorts of kind of like structural things. So I base some parts of the music on the hexagonal form of honeycomb. All sorts of things. Take a cue from there, from the structures and patterns and movement shapes and things within that we've observed in their lives, and turning that into music.
Have you written about it? Have you written about the making of it?
Yeah, we have a bit actually. We've done a couple of interviews and written some pieces. Heloise is like much more eloquent on this. Heloise she took the lead on writing the choral parts. and I took the lead on it. I've written up a whole bunch about it. And every time we talk about it and every time we discuss it, I feel like new things kind of come out as well.
Yeah, exactly. Would you send me some of what you've written about it? I would be so fascinated to.
Yeah, I'd love to hear what you think.
Thank you. Thank you.
Just thinking about that all again reminds me of, like, brings me back to what you were talking about vulnerability and intimacy. And that's something that those are things that really come through strong when I listen to your work. They feel so intimate. I feel like I'm listening to sounds in such a with all of my focus, with all of my body in a way.
Oh yes, our bodies. Wild energy came about because of my thinking for years, my interest for years in how sound affects our bodies, which was the beginning of my friendship with Pauline years ago, because we were both thinking about how sound affects our bodies, and she took it to a point of which is so just sort of universally beneficial, bless her. But in any case, I started from working with sound which I could hear through my physiological system. I started getting very curious about infra and ultrasound, which is just way outside my hearing system. And also had been thinking that with solar emissions, for example, which you've been tapping into, and I've been tapping into with Bob in Wild Energy, we both began to sort of mull over the way that vibrational energy must be passing, to some extent, a lot of vibrational energy from many living entities around us and geophysical entities must be passing through our bodies constantly. And in doing so, and bees and swarms and hives and insects collections, and their energy is constantly moving through our bodies, and if we're lucky we can hear it. Otherwise, in any case, our bodies are responding. So no matter how our culture has tried to objectify all the other manifestations in the world, the other beings in the world, entities in the world, no matter how intense the drive to objectify has been, it's pointless. We're constantly in touch with these, affected by them, you know. So it's beautiful to hear you talking about your hives, the swarms, what you're sensing and learning and feeling, and your identification with what I hear is your identification with your hives.
It's exactly what you're saying. It's there's a point when you have an encounter like that, when you start, for me, for example, starting to work with bees, where it feels so mad that there's at some point humans decided that there was a hierarchy in the natural world, and that we somehow sit outside of everything, like these kind of supreme beings, and that everything else is there for our taking and exploitation and whatnot. And you have these encounters with, in this case, with bees, and it just takes you over. Like we were inspecting the bees just the other day, and there was a moment where we just stood in between the hives listening to the sound, and it just washes through you, and I felt like, I can't describe it. It's sublime, and I can't control that. It's just the sound waves moving through me.
Yes.
Which reminds me totally of, I was listening to Tiger Balm the other night, and there are 2 kittens staying with us at the moment, and the other night I was like sitting, hanging out, just listening to their purring, and then was listening to Tiger Balm, and just like, it's just so, it puts you into such a state of bliss, that sound.
Isn't it a wonderful sound?
Yeah.
Wonderful when it's right up next to your body when you're holding a cat that's purring, but it's wonderful just to be able to hear it. You pulls you in immediately. Yes.
Yeah, there's the pulsation and the rhythmic.
Yeah.
This is reminding me of cat's paws now, actually, when they purr, they do that thing, don't they? But yeah, there's something about the pulsation of it that's very reassuring and comforting. And then there's this kind of bassy raspiness about it, which is just delicious, isn't it?
I love that. I love that. Kitch sneezes in that recording. I love it. Or she coughs. She sort of cough sneezes. It's a mixture. I love it when she does that.
Yeah, your cat. Have you got a cat?
No, I was cat sitting for a friend's cat. It was Caroline Schneemann's old cat, elderly cat, Kitch.
Great name.
One of her beloved cats from the early days, actually. So I was lucky enough to be cat sitting Kitch, and she was up on a table, and I was listening to her purring. She was an old cat, and you can hear that in her voice. You know, I think I can anyway.
Yeah, yeah.
I was just listening to her, put a microphone down beside her, and just sat back. Beautiful rolling purring.
Yeah, it's a rolling, isn't it? My friend's partner's a doctor, and she lent me the stethoscope, and we had a little listen when they first got these kittens to them purring. It was just magic.
Oh, was it really resonant?
Yeah, right inside your ears as well. With a stethoscope right up against their little chests. It was wild.
What a great idea.
I also did that with my own heart. Have you ever listened to your own heart?
No, I've listened to Roots, but not mine. So what's that experience like? It must be multi-layered, no?
Yeah, it's a very eerie experience. I felt really moved. And yeah, suddenly this kind of realization, I think that I remember thinking, wow, it just, because there's quite a lot of sloshing as well. It's like a, but there's like the kind of, it just sounded like this, it sounded really alive, but like alive in a way that I'm not controlling, but it's inside me. And that felt really wild. Like I'm not controlling it. It's just doing its thing. It's been doing its thing since before I was even born. And there's something about that. It just felt really.
That's I don't know, a sharp thought. No, there's this thing as part of my body which is keeping me alive.
Yes,
which I can't control.
Yeah, it's keeping me alive, which I think is wild. And then after that, there's this like deep humility, because it's just like soldiering through, doing its thing, keeping you alive.
And it is me.
And it is you.
Some all these sort of layers of what the heart is, you know, just converging like that. Wow.
Yeah, it's a muscle. It's really muscular. It's blood, but then there's also like all of the like maybe, how do you say, metaphorical or like emotional layers to that as well.
Of course. Are you going to do anything with? Are you going to record that yourself? Your heart? Are you going to record your heart? Not there.
Maybe one day. It doesn't feel like it's knocking at my door just yet. I've got some other things that I want to get. Of
course, it just suddenly struck me as a remarkably sort of home, right in one's home, central. Home.
What are you working on at the moment? You said at the beginning of the conversation.
I'm working on a piece, an electroacoustic piece, based on recordings I made, field recordings I made back in June in the little village in New England, in New Hampshire, where Ruth and I really fell in love, got to know each other in our first year together. And it's fun and funny working on them because it's such a quiet little village. So they're all really low-level recordings, except for the occasional bit of traffic. So it's a challenge and it's fun. But and Ruth had done something which I was well aware of, but hadn't thought about for a while. She had recorded our phone conversations. We were constantly calling each other, sometimes a couple of times a day during, well, I was in New York. I was teaching in her studio. I was a sabbatical replacement for her. And she was in New Hampshire working on pieces. And we were constantly calling it. And she recorded many of our phone conversations. And so I have her voice also.
Wow.
So see if I can do it. Many layers there too. But,
yeah.
But isn't it wonderful to be able to work with sound? I was going to say material, but in a way that makes it objective again. It's not material, but sound worlds which are so close to us and so you can't put your hands on them. You can't grab them, right?
It feels like, I remember so I did my first experiments with going out and just recording, going to a location and recording sound and then turning it, or no, I'm not going to say I turned it into music, but I turned them into a piece that I felt amplified the musicality of the sounds that I found. But I remember feeling like I was constantly unlocking something just by paying attention to the sounds. So the first piece that I did, I went to this it's not a very pretty building. It's quite a like building in London. It's like it's called the Shard. It looks like a big shard.
I can picture it.
And I went and I spent hours and hours hanging around, recording the sound of escalators and newspaper people and people walking past and trucks and taxis. I smuggled my way into like a cafe restaurant on the 40th floor or something and started recording the sound of the locks in the toilets and the clang of cutlery and just every possible sound I could get my hands on, and came back and listened back to them and started to construct these pieces using them. And I didn't end up manipulating them that much. I quite liked the idea of letting them stand on their own, but still I was manipulating them in that I was like chopping stuff up and turning some things into rhythms. But the thing that I found really exciting was listening and unlocking these secret little melodies and rhythm patterns that just happened at a certain point. And then if I cut it and looped it, you could suddenly hear the rhythm in it.
I love that about rivers. They're in rivers par excellence. Yeah, there's delicate little internal melodies and rhythms, sort of mid-range melodies. Yeah, I listen for those too. But you hear them everywhere, right? You hear them in people's voices, people conversing at a little distance. I mean, they're everywhere.
Yeah. I love that. I think I hear it more having done those pieces. And I noticed around the time that I was doing those recordings, I don't know about you, but I feel like when I'm doing that kind of focused work, my hearing just switches and I'd hear it in everything. And it was quite distracting because I'd be walking down the street and I'd be tuning into all these different sounds.
I do too. I mean, lately I've been listening so closely to Ruth's voice or to these ambient recordings. And then I walk outside and exactly that. I'm hearing absolutely everything. And I want to hang on to that.
Yeah.
Hold on to that sensitivity. And then my stomach talks to me and says, you need a cup of coffee. And it vanishes.
I love it. Yeah, it's fun, isn't it? You're like really, oh my God, really getting into the sound of a truck engine turning.
Or our property is full of trees here. And so the ground is littered with drying leaves, and just walking through it. It's a small place, but it has lots of trees. Walking through it on the leaves, through the leaves, is the most heavenly sound. I'm beginning to think I've got to tape that.
Oh my God, yes. Tomorrow, go out.
Yes.
That's your assignment for tomorrow. That sounds divine.
Oh.
You're going to come back and you'll be still out there like 3 or 4 days later.
Yes, of course. Can you tell me something about the piece you've made for a riot ensemble?
Yeah, it's called Munganyinka is a transformer.
Mm-hmm.
And it is based on a story from my mother's childhood as a refugee from Rwanda during the first genocide in the late 50s, early 60s. And she was 14 or 15 years old at the time. And it's an incredible story that's come to have a really deep significance for me on lots of levels. Because she is just so, I just find her capacity to transform a situation from one thing into another just awe-inspiring. And the story is that she was trying to get back into Rwanda to find her family, but couldn't, and she had to leave the country very quickly. And she was trying to cross over the border, and she gets to a bridge, goes over a river, and there were several factions who were all shooting at each other at this border. And she realized on her feet, just realized the only way I'm going to be able to get over this bridge is if I pretend to be a dog. And so she transforms into a dog, and she gets on all fours, and she crosses the bridge, and she makes it to safety. And I just think she's just like a superhero for having the the smarts and the intelligence and the quick-wittedness and the instinct So for me, that story, Ma told me that like a while ago, but it kept knocking on my door. And I knew the significance in it. I felt like it was important that I explored it deeper. And then when I was asked, when HCMF and the Riot Ensemble commissioned me to make a piece, it was the very first thing that I wanted to work with. And I'd already interviewed Mum a couple of times about this story. I interviewed her again. We talked about the piece, and I told her exactly what I wanted to do with it. I was paired with a brilliant musician, their bass clarinetist. And I think it was when that happened, that was when I was like absolutely sure that this was the right thing to do. I wanted to amplify her voice and celebrate the story. And I felt like the bass clarinet was just a really apt element in that duet because of the nature of a bass clarinet and how close it is in some ways to the human voice. And my Ma's voice has got a real intrinsic melody to it. So I was super excited about what if I could translate her, or find a way of extracting or kind of extrapolating some of the inner music within her voice, amplifying that, allowing her story to be told, but also taking some of the intrinsic music and extending out from there. So we worked with her voice. We put it through Melodyne, translated it into MIDI, turned it into a score. Alcias started to learn all of the intonations of my mother's voice, started to learn how to play that. So there's sections where he follows her voice exactly. And then he splits off, and then we started to explore multiphonics and loads of textural, beautiful stuff that is part of her voice and some of the rhythms and frequencies that are in there. And yeah, so that's been, it's been quite an adventure.
It must be a critical piece in your life as a composer, no?
Yeah, I had no idea quite what I'd bitten off. I don't know if you ever.
I often don't. I don't now.
Such a relief. I often feel like I take on stuff and I've got no idea what I'm walking into.
Yeah, but that way we explore. That way we can explore, right?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I knew that there was basically this story had been knocking on my door, then having the opportunity to work with LCS, and then looking at the ways in which the voice and the bass clarinet could work together. I was also really excited about working with LCS and his relationship with the instrument as well, which I from hearing you talk about your recent collaborations, like the ones you were talking about just earlier, that in itself unlocks so much, doesn't it? That kind of like letting the musician and an instrument go on a journey together as well. So yeah, that in itself was big. And then yeah, I guess working with my Ma's voice has been deeply humbling and brought up a lot of, it's been quite a mad journey. It's the first, in the program notes I said it, her heartbeat is the first rhythm I knew, and her voice is the first music that I knew. And it wasn't until I made this piece that I really had that realization properly, you know?
It sounds, it's profound. It's a profound journey. It must be a profound journey, but and a beautiful one.
Thank you.
I love the bass clarinet too.
It's so good, isn't it? Oh,
so beautiful, so expressive, such a complex set of timbres. Oh, lovely thing to work with. But how? Oh, I got to hear it. So I hear it themed, right? In the festival.
I can't wait to learn it. I mean, it freaks me out because it's such a personal story, and I don't think I've ever really worked in this way before, in such an explicit way before. So there's a part of me that was slightly freaked out a couple of weeks ago, to be honest. But I'm making peace with that now.
That's what I'm feeling about working with Ruth's voice and these recordings.
Oh, for sure.
And what we had to say to one another. Yeah, very personal, sort of risky journey, which is the best sort of journey. Yeah.
Can you tell me a bit about the piece that you've written that's going to be performed at HCMF this year?
Earwalking Woman. Earwalking Woman was written for a terrific American pianist, Lois Svard. His lovely interpreter, super smart musician, listens so closely and of course technically absolutely amazing. Anyway, it was written for Lois, and she asked me to make a piano piece for her, and so I went inside the piano immediately and went through all the little objects which I've collected over the years. Some immediately make sound, some of them are tools for making sound, and they have, almost all of them have nothing to do with the traditional world of music whatsoever, and started playing inside the piano with all these objects and finding sounds which I thought were really alive, which is always my criterion: does something sound alive? And took them to Lois and suggested to her that they were the basis for the piece. She loved them also. She's super good at working inside the piano. And then I started writing a series of little, if you think of them in text terms, paragraphs, really. Composing a series of paragraphs, each focused on a particular set of tools and gestures and types of sound, and asking her, but each of them being like a door opening into the world of sound those objects will elicit, and asking her to explore them further to see how far these sounds can go, how far these tools can go, what they can do, what she can find. So, and that's a process that I call ear walking. The title. And she's marvelous at it. She loves doing it. She was immediately in tune, totally in tune with that. And then towards the end of the piece, there's a little homage to John Cage, because how can you write a prepared piano piece and not doff to John? Right. So some of the preparations, I mean, there are coins, there are screws, you know, just a few of the preparations are his classic preparations. And it changes a lot. Of course, it changes wonderfully from piano to piano and pianist to pianist. So it becomes a really collaborative piece.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess everyone who comes to play it brings their own flavor, don't they?
Oh, their own personality, their own way of listening, their own relationship with the instrument, you know, their personal relationship with their body, their mind and the spirit with the instrument itself. Yeah, so it becomes a very personal piece for everyone who plays it.
Do you get do you get a kick out of that, out of the fact that every time it's going to be?
Oh, I do. And I love the chance. I heard Sarah play it recently for Bang on a Can. And I love Sarah's playing. I've loved her playing for years, but I hadn't had a chance to hear her playing this piece before. And the sound she produces is so multidimensional, really. And I can hear when she's playing the sense of both the strong sensory feeling of how closely she's listening, how she's listening, pulling my listening into, as it were, my ears and into her ears. That's a very strong sense. I love her timing, her pacing, her patience. She makes things happen with that piece. So
That's
I'm going to be playing it again.
I love the way you describe that, pulling my ears into her ears. That's such a good way of putting it.
It's what happens with Nate too.
Yeah,
you know, Nate's a magnificent musician and composer and wonderful trumpet player. And so when he's doing Becoming Air, he finds something happening with his breath and the instrument, which is fresh. And he lets it expand. And in that process, I'm being pulled inside the sound, actually. He's pulling me inside the sound. He's allowing it to be really personal. He's allowing his full body to be perceptible, you know, as he makes it. So it becomes very personal, and I get pulled inside his being and also inside the sound. And being inside a sound is the best possible place to be, isn't it? I mean, being inside the sounds of your voices in your vocal pieces is a marvelous experience, and of intimacy, of female strength, of female groundedness, you know, and female joy. I just love them. So I'm going to be listening a lot.
Oh, thank you. Same. So, and it's so, yeah, it's a real gift to hear you talking so like directly to what gets you excited about the way that you work as well. Because now I feel like when I listen again, maybe on some level, your ears will be pulling my ears into your ears.
No, that's a loop that I really like.